now, so we need. Good evening, everybody. My name is Phil Stasek. I'm the past president of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance. It's wonderful to have all of you here tonight. We have the second part of our program called Global Warming, Truth and Consequences. This is part 2 of our program. And last week, of those of you that were with us, you'll remember that we had a field campaign manager from Oceania. We had the executive director of Rethink Energy Florida and the principal scientist from Applied Ecology, Inc., talking about different elements of global climate change and its impact on our planet. This week, we have first a youth speaker who's going to be talking to us about the impact on young people. Second, we've got our panel of 3 fantastic and experienced people. Dr. Steve Lazarus, he's an FIT professor of meteorology and ocean engineering. Our next would be Dr. Robert Scheller from the North Carolina State University. He's an associate dean, College of Natural Resources. And then finishing up the program, Dr. Catherine Tom. She's a public health physician and a leader of Green Cards for Kids. She's going to be talking about the impact on human beings and what we can do to help each other. We've got a little bit of business to get done here, and then we'll get right to the program. But one thing I'd like to remind everybody is that at the end of all of our programs, it's open to you, the viewer. Those of you that have joined us on Zoom will be able to ask questions and interact directly with our panelists. And we'll be talking more about that later. But the name of the game is we're going to get this meeting underway. I'm going to do a quick introduction of our current president, Karen Houston. Karen, are you there?
I'm here, Phil. Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Glad to see y'all here. Thankful that all of you participating in this program tonight. Thank you for all the speakers. As we did last month, I want to make a brief mention, not because it's in any way minimized, but we spoke last month a little bit about the things that are happening in the world today. And if many of you that know the history of Progressive Alliance, you know that Progressive Alliance was founded because of a peace protest. A group of people got together and they're for peace. So, and our plea as SCPA right now is for peace and justice in the world, both abroad and at home. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you all for that. And well, I don't know why I always say thank you, but let's hope that our plea, maybe prayers, whatever we can do, can bring some sort of resolve. And so I'm going to get to this program tonight. And one of the first things that we're going to talk about is, first of all, I want to give thanks to Larry Abdullah, Bonnie Ida, and the Action Projects Committee, headed by our chairperson, Janice Moran. Our Action Project Committee put on these events monthly, and we appreciate all the hard work they do. And so we just want to reach out, say thank you to all the people that put their efforts out, and reach out to you wonderful speakers and get this all put together. It's not an easy task, believe me. Now, our next event will be a holiday party, which will be Thursday, December 7th. It's for members. So we're asking if anyone's interested. Our wonderful Action Projects Committee chairperson, Janice Moran, has agreed to receive anybody who wants to RSVP or reserve a table, be a part of a holiday party. You can reach out to her. We'll put that information into the chat, so that make sure you reach out to Janice Moran if you'd like to come to the party. It's one of those. There she is. It's one of those. It's in a River Rocks restaurant. River Rocks. It's in Rockledge, South Rockledge, and it'll be 3 p.m. if I'm not mistaken. So we have to have a number, because this is a venue that you'll have to have a number of people. It's a restaurant. So we'd love for you to join us. This is for members only. So please, if you'd like to join us, let Janice know. And our January 4th event, that's going to be our elections meeting, as well as open mic for that night. And so you can check our website for details about that. But if you'd like to be on the nominating committee, or if you'd like to be nominated, you can reach out to me. We'll also put that information in the chat, so you can check that out. Or you can find some of this information on our website. So if you're interested, we're looking forward to a change of guard, hopefully. But if not, we're just looking for anybody who wants to be on the committee, or anyone who'd like to be nominated. You can nominate yourself as well. And you can check our website out at scpaflorida.com. That's scpaflorida.com. And so I'm going to turn it over right now to our treasurer, Carol Becker. She's going to give you a little more information about memberships and contributions.
Thank you, Karen. You can go to scpaflorida.com and enter your information and a credit card to pay for membership, or you can go to SCPA, you can write a check and send it to SCPA PO Box 412, Melbourne, Florida 32902. A family membership is $35, an individual is $25, and a student membership is $10. And if you pay now, you'll be covered for the all of 2024.
Thank you, Carol.
And I'll put that address in the chat.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And action items. Every month we have these wonderful programs. These guest speakers come and they give us all this insight and information. It'd be a shame to just leave it on these few ears that we have here. So we're asking that first of all, our panelists will be the ones that give us the action items. And we're asking you, the rest of you, to please take heed to whatever information our panelists give you. The environment, the world, the whole, everything. We need to do something. So don't just take it here and leave it here. Whatever they give you as an action item, please follow through with that. And so I just want to once again, remember, if you'd like to join us for our holiday party, please reach out to Janice Moran. If you'd like to be nominated, reach out to me. And that, like I said, that information will be in chat. I'm going to give it back to Phil. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you so much, Karen. Hey, I appreciate that. It is very, very important that everybody participate as best you can. And as Karen was saying, we've got a lot to do tonight, so we're going to get right to it. But we always traditionally ask if there is somebody here who has an announcement for the community. We've got 1 minute community announcement window. If you would like to raise your hand, and again, in order to raise your hand on Zoom, you'll look for the little button that says reactions. Click on that, and you'll find a little thing that says raise hand. And if you raise your hand, we can call on you, give you a minute to make an announcement. If you're a candidate running for office, you just raise your hand, and it puts you right in line. So anybody that's got an announcement for the community, please do let us know. It looks like Lily has her hand up. Lily, you have the floor. You got 1 minute to make a community announcement. Lily, you just have to unmute yourself.
Yes. Hello, can you hear me?
Well, I've got you loud and clear.
Okay. Hello, my name is Lily. I am with a nonprofit organization called Complementary Contraception. We support individual family planning goals. That means that if somebody's low income, needs help paying for long-term contraceptive care like the pill or the IUD or something like that, we would love for them to apply with us, and we will help pay for the contraception. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Lily. I appreciate it. And do we have any other candidates? Anybody that's got an announcement to make this evening? A 1 minute announcement? Lily, you may be the lucky person who've gotten your announcement out tonight. We're gonna see if anybody. Oh, it looks like Vicky and Poco has an announcement. Vicky, you have a minute, and you'll need to take yourself off mute. And there she goes.
I'm sorry, I was just applauding Lily and her efforts. I meant to applaud,
Yay.
not raise my hand. Thank you,
Yay.
Lily, for what you're doing in the community. Great job. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Vicky, and we appreciate you doing that for us. Let's see, do we have anybody else? And your hand is still up, and I'll help you take that down, I think. There we go. Okay. And anybody else, any other 1-minute announcements? We do not. So I think
So
we're
I
going to.
just wanted to remind people about the petition, the right to clean water, the right to clean water.org. Go to that site. You can download a petition and sign it. That's all I have to say. You know you want it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The clean water petition is a very, very important thing. We've talked about that. In fact, we had a special event on that recently. So if you're not sure about that, take a look through. If you're go to YouTube and look for the Space Coast Progressive Alliance channel, and you'll find our program about the clean water petition, and with basically every answer to your questions right there, and information about how you can get a copy of that petition. Thank you very much. Any others? We don't. I think it's time for us to begin our program. And for those of you that have just joined us, you're now with the Space Coast Progressive Alliance program called Global Warming, Truth and Consequences, Part 2. And we have a wonderful panel, 3 experts, 3 doctors actually to talk to us about climate change in its big picture. We have a young speaker who's going to start the program. And I would very quickly like to put this in context. Many people years ago were in denial or were doubting whether the climate was changing as a result of man-made effects, in other words, anthropogenic change. As the years have gone by, I think fewer and fewer people seriously doubt that our climate is changing, and fewer still really doubt that it's being caused by human activity. It's really important for us to understand that this is foundational. It's existential. It is the future of our entire planet is changing as the result of human activity. This is why we've had 2 programs back to back this year on this topic. It's incredibly important that we learn as much as we can, that we change our behavior before it's too late. And so tonight we have a young person who has spent much of her life fighting to fix climate change, to wake people up. She's a 24-year-old climate activist. Her name is Delaney Reynolds, and we would like to give her the floor. Delaney, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Phil. Hi, everyone. Good evening. I hope you can see my PowerPoint. Oh, good. Awesome. Okay. So I want to, thanks. So I'd like to start by just thanking everyone at the Space Coast Progressive Alliance for having me here tonight, especially Phil and Barbara. And I'd also like to thank an organization that I work with a lot and we'll talk about in a little bit, our Children's Trust, for nominating me to be the speaker. So most importantly, of course, thank all of you for being here, for wanting to learn more about what I think is the biggest issue that our planet will ever face, and for making our climate crisis and the role that we play in solving it a priority in your life. So tonight I'm going to talk about how I became involved in climate change, why it is that we should care so much, and give some examples of what youth have been doing in the political realm to try and help save our planet. So by way of general introduction, I am the 4th generation of my family to live in Miami, Florida. And growing up in South Florida, I've actually split my time between Miami and a small 1,000-acre island in the Florida Keys called No Name Key, and it has just 40 solar-powered homes on it. So in a way, you could say that my life has literally been surrounded by water as I've grown up, and I've always had a love of nature, a fascination with the ocean, and learned about the benefits of renewable energies from a very young age. And those passions led me to write, illustrate, and publish 3 children's books on ecology topics in between elementary and middle school. And it was actually while researching for those books that I learned about climate change and decided to write my 4th book on sea level rise. So what I began to do was interview scientists, business owners, and policymakers to learn what they were doing and how they were being impacted by the problem. And at this point, it was about 2015. So it wasn't so much a topic that youth were talking about. So I had to go out into our community to see what was going on. And so the point of the book is to tell stories about real people here in South Florida who are being impacted by climate change, whether it's business people or residents, scientists, policymakers, and to show that this is actually happening, and also to talk about how we solve it. So I took everything that I was learning, including the fact that, like I said, I felt young people weren't really aware of the magnitude of what was happening or what we needed to do to solve the problem. And I founded the Sink or Swim Project and its website, miamisearise.com, as a nonprofit organization that aims to educate people about climate change, as well as seek solutions to try and save South Florida and places like it before it's too late. A lot of that work includes political advocacy, as I'll talk about in a little bit. And since creating the Sink or Swim Project, I've earned my Bachelor of Science in Marine Science, Geology, and Climate Policy, and I'm now a graduate student at the University of Miami in a dual program pursuing my law degree in environmental law and PhD in environmental science. So climate change and the environment is my life and has been for a while. So as such, I'd like to start with a little quick refresher on some of the science, just to show you exactly why we should be concerned about this issue and to explain why youth are taking extreme efforts. I'll go quickly and not share too much because I know Dr. Lazarus will go more in depth in a little bit. So this first graph, as you can read, is the population of our planet, which today is 8.1 billion people, and that's indicated by the blue line on this graph. But the point of me showing you this is that all of the future scientific predictions, the red, orange, and green lines, all show the population continuing to trend upward. So more people means more consumption, more cars and factories, and more need for fossil fuels that pollute our atmosphere, unless we start to transition our society to one based on renewable energies. Now, this here is called the Keeling curve, and I think it's one of the most important images in climate science. It illustrates the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere and that it has been growing consistently since the 1950s. Now, as you can see, like I said, it's been growing, and today we are over 400 parts per million of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, which is alarmingly dangerous. Scientists warned us that we should stay below 350. So we are clearly past that and continue to rise as we continue to use fossil fuels. And as this chart shows, our planet is getting warmer as a result of the excess greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. In fact, the temperature of the planet has not dropped below the average since 1980, as you can see on this graph. And in the United States, the average temperature has increased in general overall by almost 2 degrees since the start of the 20th century when the Industrial Revolution began. Coincidence? Not quite. So year after year, we have been breaking temperature records. 2014 was the hottest year. 2015 broke that record. 2016 broke that record. 2019 was the 3rd hottest year. 2020 was the 2nd hottest year. And there's a greater than 99% chance that 2023 will be the Earth's hottest year on record. Now, of course, this is something that we all know as we've been experiencing the extreme heat this past summer. And in fact, no previous September was as close to as warm as this past September, which was 0.93 degrees Celsius above normal, as you can see here. And the margin by which it was the warmest September on record by itself was record-setting. So it was followed also by a record hot summer and the Earth's hottest month and day during July. Now, like I said, I don't need to remind anyone about the extreme heat that we experienced this summer. I'll certainly never forget it. And it's likely not the warmest summer that I will ever experience, unfortunately. We most certainly felt it here in Miami, reaching 175 hours with a feels like temperature of 105 or hotter. That's more than 3 times the previous record. So even if you find the rest of the science unconvincing, which I hope that you don't, we can all read a thermometer, and there's absolutely no denying that our planet is warming at an alarming rate. So as such, it is crucial that we elect fewer conservative politicians beholden to fossil fuel companies, banning books, attacking people who are already marginalized, and attacking science. This whole narrative against science and vaccines is just wrong. And if we want to solve the climate crisis, we have to embrace science, not ridicule it, not ridicule highly educated, decade-long public servants like Dr. Fauci, someone who was on the front edge of ostensibly solving the AIDS crisis a generation ago, as you all know, much less being at the forefront of helping us navigate through a once in a 100-year pandemic in the form of COVID. And so I submit to you that rather than politicizing and diminishing the science and only wanting to talk about resilience projects as opposed to attacking the core problem, which is predominantly our worldwide love affair with fossil fuels, certainly gasoline and coal in this country, we need to begin to shift our entire economy and society from one based on the antiquated use of fossil fuels to one based on renewable energy sources. And I need your help with that. And young people all over the state, the country, and the world beyond need your help with that in changing the political landscape. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you folks of all people. I'm sure you know that given the organization that you're involved in. But if anyone in our country needed a refresher on why that's so important, you just have to look at what's been happening in the House of Representatives over the last 3 weeks. It's like a cacophony of chaos that is basically the Republican Party. And although I don't think any of us have an all-encompassing answer, I am always curious as to why it is always the Republican Party. And while I'm not here to deliver a political message per se, at least in my lifetime, whether it's Governor Scott telling the world that he's not a scientist and outlawing the use of climate terminology, or the biggest fake environmentalist that our state has likely ever seen in our current governor, or let alone the previous president, it's typically the Republican Party. That's what it's been in my lifetime. So if you doubt that, you just have to look at the climate and energy positions that DeSantis has laid out over the last 2 weeks to set aside electric vehicles, to expand fossil fuel generation and use, and to eliminate essentially all government initiatives, including the Paris Accord. Here we go again. If he's elected president. So if that's not taking steps backwards, miles backwards, then I don't know what is. And so while we need your help, every one of you that's not a child or a young adult like I am, all of us together, we need your help. But I'm here to tell you that young people are trying their best to do their part. So at an early age, when I was 15 years old, I helped see my home county, Miami-Dade County, obtain its first ever county budget to combat sea level rise and create our very first chief sustainability officer. Like I said, I did that in high school at 15 years old. And while I was also in high school, I conceived, helped author, and then implemented the very first law of its type in Florida, only the second state in the United States. California was the first. But here in the city of South Miami, we passed a mandatory solar power law that requires all new homes to have solar power. And as some of you may know, I led a lawsuit with some friends of mine called Reynolds v. State of Florida, where we sued Governor Scott and then DeSantis, trying to insist that the state take action based on our constitutional rights to help solve the climate crisis. And I'm going to talk about that more in the realm of Montana in a second, because our case was unfortunately dismissed. The judge ruled that it was a political question that he didn't have the authority to answer, which is not quite the case. But anyways, we kept working. And more recently last year, I led a petition where hundreds of Florida youth demanded that the state change its energy policies by creating rules that require that the source of all power sold in the state of Florida comes exclusively from sustainable solutions by 2050 or before then. And so I'm really happy to tell you that the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services and its commissioner, who you can see here, Nikki Fried, or former commissioner, she's currently the Florida Democratic Party leader. She embraced our petition. And after about 2 years of work, me going back and forth to Tallahassee and working with signatures and the amazing people at Our Children's Trust, we finally got the approved rule published. And now we're working with the Public Service Commission to get them to embrace and enact the rule. But Like I said, I'm going to talk about some other lawsuits, and it's not just my own work. There are young people all over this country and planet that are doing their part. The people at Our Children's Trust are deeply involved in a federal lawsuit called Juliana versus the United States, and they're asking the federal government to protect our constitutional rights to a clean atmosphere. And they are moving forward. They're headed to the Supreme Court, which is really exciting, and that's going to happen in the next few months. And like I said, I was going to talk about Montana. So Our Children's Trust worked in Montana in a case you may have heard about recently entitled Held versus Montana, where 16 youth made history here in the United States. So the Montana case asserted that by supporting a fossil fuel driven system, contributing to the climate crisis, the state of Montana is violating their constitutional rights to a clean and healthful environment. And they also argued that the state's fossil fuel energy system is degrading and depleting Montana's constitutionally protected public trust resources, including the atmosphere. And that's an ancient Roman legal doctrine that a lot of states have adopted, including Florida. And so for the first time in the United States, the District Court of Montana ruled wholly in favor of the youth plaintiffs, meaning they agreed with every single one of their claims, which is a big deal. So they agreed that the atmosphere is a public trust resource, that they have a right to a clean and healthful environment, that they had shown significant injury from the impacts of climate change, and that the government had a role in causing that injury. So Montana is a really interesting place because it's only one of 4 states whose constitution specifically speaks to constitutional rights to a healthful and clean environment. So I hope and I wish that other states, including Florida, may follow what's happening in Montana, because it is certainly a great step forward and a win for Montana, our country, and the world beyond. We need those types of decisions and actions by state legislatures all over the country before it's too late. So I can promise you that we're still working here in Florida to fight for our climate and ensure that our government takes this issue seriously and starts to work in the right direction towards the use of renewable energies rather than the antiquated use of fossil fuels. And I'd like to encourage every one of you to support youth in their endeavors, no matter how aggressive they may appear, because we really don't have a choice. We have to protect special places all over Florida, because if we don't, then these places all over our state will disappear. They could be lost forever, become extinct due to sea level rise, increased temperatures, all sorts of issues that stem from climate change. And our children may never get to learn to swim in the place that I learned to swim when I was a young child. And that's unacceptable to me. So thankfully, I hope what you get from this is that no matter who you are, where you're from, or what your challenges might be, you have a voice, and it's my experience that people will listen to you. So again, I implore you to, take this message into your political work and, try to help the environment, even if it's just a little bit. Thank you.
Hooray, Delaney. Thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much. And I'll tell you what, Delaney, I want to tell you, one of the things that I love to always tell people is, if we were having this as a live meeting the way we used to, you would have a standing ovation right now. Everybody here in the audience would be clapping and hooting. You are a real hero, and I know you've been working a long time on this, and I suspect that you're going to continue to be working on this for a long time. Maybe while the rest of us here on this panel are gone, you'll still be fighting the fight, and I hope that you are successful. You are really an inspiration. And I hope that everyone that's watching this is inspired by Delaney. There are a lot of us that can look at this analytically. We could think about the politics of the government, the money, whatever. But let's think about the young people. Let's think about the young kids that are born today and what kind of a world we're leaving to them. Delaney has shown us that you can never be too young to become an activist. And I tell you what, you've really inspired me. Thank you very much, Delaney, and I hope you can stick around to answer questions as we progress through the program.
I will.
Thank you very much. If you are just joining us, you have joined the Space Coast Progressive Alliance program, Global Warming, Truth and Consequences, Part 2. And we have a fantastic panel ahead of us. three wonderful, highly qualified speakers who can talk at different angles on this issue of global climate change. Our next speaker is an old friend of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance, Dr. Steve Lazarus from Florida Tech. He is an FIT professor of meteorology and ocean engineering, and we have always enjoyed listening to his presentations. And tonight he's going to be introducing the details, the tech, the specifics, and everything you've ever wanted to know about global climate change. Dr. Lazarus, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm actually going to carve out just a small little niche here. But before I do that, Delaney, I like two of your images in particular. One of the key deer, which are dear to me, excuse the pun, that they were in the news this week as being on the cusp of extinction because of rising sea level in the Keys, which I think is certainly apropos for tonight's discussion. And then hold on a second here. I just lost my zoom there. The other one I like, which is a nice basically jump off, is the flooded scene that you have on the last PowerPoint slide, because that's actually, Phil, what I'm going to talk about tonight. So let me go ahead and share the screen. I know we got somebody that's going to talk more about forest fires tonight, so that's awesome. Let me go and actually I'll go ahead and launch this. Screen. And then more, let me hide, let's see, hide floating meeting controls and move this guy over here. Give me a second and then I'll go ahead and bring it back up. All righty. So thank you guys. Bill, thanks for having me. That's awesome. Like I said, I'm just going to carve out a little bit, talk about precipitation and a changing climate. We're all in Florida. And so this certainly has an impact on our lives here. And I'll try to bring that home here as I talk about it. Anybody, I guess you'd have to have your head buried in the sand not to realize or be aware of what's been going on. I put a little collage together of some of the more recent flooding events. I'm sure nobody missed the New York City flooding, which is several of these pictures. And then just prior to that, basically, there's a picture in the lower left of Montpelier, Vermont, some pretty serious flooding up near the ski resorts and that in Vermont, as well as Stowe area. So it's been obviously in the news, and these things have been on the rise and increase over the last decade or so. It's hard to miss. So this is my precipitation 101. You can put a couple of things on the table in terms of causes for the increase in extreme events over the last century or so. The most prominent reason, and most likely anyway on the table, is rising global surface temperatures, most specifically ocean temperatures, which have increased the evaporation rates. And so folks might be aware of that or may not be aware of that. And that adds water vapor to the atmosphere. A little cartoon on the lower right showing the movement of water. And when people refer to a hydrologic cycle, that's sort of the cartoon involving basically the transport, precipitation, evaporation, condensation, runoff. So there's a hydrologic component as well to the cycle. Anyway, this idea of a hydrologic cycle on steroids in a warmer climate is well known in the scientific community and heavily studied and a lot of research. I'll talk a little bit about the physics of that and then conclude with some comments as far as that's concerned. Ultimately, we're talking about a change in the number or the intensity or the frequency, excuse me, or intensity in these extreme events. It turns out that you can make predictions based on some basic math and science. And then, of course, observations don't always perfectly agree with these things. And I'll talk a little bit why that is. So in a nutshell, if you've looked at some of the summary from the IPCC, the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, AR6 report, in particular, there's two chapters that deal with the hydrologic cycle, 2 and 8. They're pretty clear, basically, that climate change is already having an impact on the water cycle, and it's driving more extreme events and floods. And it says that evidence between the link between rising temperatures and heavy precip has been strengthened since the previous report that was issued several years ago. And of course, I'm talking about AR6, which is 2021. But ultimately, these interactions between a warming climate and precipitation are pretty complicated. But ultimately, they say with high confidence, the report concludes that the global average precipitation and evaporation are increasing with global warming. And you generally, when they hear this, they'll give you levels of how high their confidence levels. So they give this one a very likely, And they used, in this case, for precipitation, a range of 1 to 3% per degree C of warming. Okay, so that's sort of the rate, basically, of change. All right, so you may hear me use this, so I'm trying to be careful about the terminology tonight. So just a little, please stand by, a little segue here. Something called attribution science. It's kind of relatively new as far as climate is concerned, and it's ultimately an area of research that examines whether or not an observed event was made more intense by global warming. In particular, there's a portion of the attribution science called hindcast, which means kind of in the past. Attribution, in that case, scientists are comparing real-world results, observations, with model simulations that assume there had been no anthropogenic warming whatsoever. So I'll use attribution science a little bit here. I just wanted to give some people an idea of what that meant. So what are the physics? Well, I thought this was a really cool article from the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. I'm outside, and that's not so good. All right, so I guess that's not a good thing for doing this outside. All right, so an equation. What does almost a 200-year-old equation say about rainstorms in a changing climate? It's really a nice sort of a general article. And there's a little quote on the right from Charles Darwin's book and Voyage of the Beagle. He had a very hungry crowd when they were traveling one night in the Andes at high elevation, and it was taking forever to cook their food. And so while he's certainly a brilliant scientist and theoretician, he blamed that problem basically on his equipment, and rather than what was really at the heart of the matter, and that is basically this idea that the temperature for boiling was lowered at high elevation due to the decreased pressure. So why is that important? Well, it turns out that a French engineer named Émile Clapeyron came around and said, well, figured out why the reduced pressure affected the water's boiling point. And he established a relationship that's shown in the lower right, which is highly nonlinear. So you're looking at temperature on the x-axis and water vapor pressure, saturation vapor pressure on the y-axis. And you can see it's definitely not a straight line. So as temperature goes up, especially in the warmer region of those temperatures there from about 20 degrees to 40 degrees C, it goes up rapidly. So I have a little cartoon basically that shows a bucket of water at a cool, on the left, cool water, on the right, warm water. And as the equilibrium temperature increases, as I go from 1 to 2, you're increasing the kinetic energy of the molecules, more are escaping. And as long as the temperature reaches a new warm equilibrium, eventually the number that are returning to the water catch up. Ultimately, that's the definition of saturation vapor pressure. And so you have more leaving, you have more returning. It's an equilibrium condition, basically. And so the take home on this is that a warmer atmosphere has more water vapor. Okay, so why do we care? Well, it's important if we're going to forecast basically the increased strength of systems, of weather systems, in particular the higher intensity of rainfall. And of course, again, that nonlinear relationship suggests that even small increases of temperature can have a large increase basically in water vapor and possibly in precipitation. And so the article does make a point ultimately that relationship basically, people make sort of this misunderstanding of that relationship, that it controls basically precipitation. It doesn't control the amount of rainfall directly, just the amount of water vapor. And so there are other things that are also important basically that will impact essentially how much precipitation you get in response to the warming. And so the equation says about ultimately for every degree Celsius, you get about 7% more water vapor, not more precip. So you might think then, well, then 2 degrees C would give you 14% more. 3 degrees C would give you 21% more. And as I was suggesting, this is not that simple. One of the problems, of course, is how saturated the air gets. Depends how much water is around to saturate it. And so you can think of this sort of relationship that Clapeyron developed basically as more of an upper limit on the amount of water vapor. And it works much better over oceans where you have plenty of water to saturate the air. Right. So over land, not so much basically. And so it'll be limited basically by soil water content and things like that. And so ultimately the take home here is that to get really heavy rain phenomena, there needs to be an air mass origin from over an ocean. So that's really key. All right. So we're in Florida. What kind of systems might become wetter or might be more moist here in Florida? I've got 3 candidates here. Only basically one of them really affects our weather. And that is the one on the lower right. I'm showing you a picture of Hurricane Ian right before landfall. And so tropical cyclones, there are observations now that support what we know, and that hurricanes, basically tropical cyclones in general, are becoming basically heavier. The precipitation associated with these large, semi-large scale events are becoming heavier. The other 2 on the left, mesoscale convective systems, are more of an upper Midwest phenomenon. And then these atmospheric rivers are very pronounced from the Pacific Ocean for storms and impacting the California coast. And so these are other candidates basically in other locations that are affecting basically the amount of precipitation, the intensity and frequency of these events, mostly the intensity. So I had a nice little sort of, I was going to show you one live, so bear with me basically. So these are kind of nice. This is basically what we call column water vapor. It's just basically if you added up all the molecules of water vapor in the column of the atmosphere, basically you'd come up with an integrated amount of water vapor in the atmosphere. And so this is the key ingredient to producing wetter systems that I just talked about. And so it turns out most of the water vapor that's transported from low latitudes, equator, to higher latitudes, greater than 90% of that water vapor flux takes place through actually these really narrow rivers or corridors. So I have to show you, this is so cool, an animation loop. Hopefully that'll show up here. This is current water vapor loop. And I'll go ahead and do a Control A here. So this loop here, I'll make it bigger. Sorry there. So anyway, you can actually see one of these loops in here, right here, just streaming, tapping into the warmer colors are larger amounts of water vapor. You can see the primary region of that is right near the equator. But this cyclone, this mid-latitude cyclone that's still developing, is drawing up this river just off the east coast of the United States as we now speak. So these rivers are kind of interesting. So for sure. All right. And sorry about that. I'm going to put this back on. Okay. So that's an atmospheric river. I'm going to go ahead and skip this because I don't want to basically take too much time here out of this presentation mode here. All right, so precipitation's pretty variable though, and so I've got a map basically of the changes in the annual precipitation over the United States, over the lower states here, and it's a difference between the last, basically from 1986 to 2015 average. So basically that is a 30-year period minus basically a 60-year period, essentially at the first half of the last century from 1901 to 1960. The greens are basically increased annual precipitation, and the warmer colors, the browns, are decreased. And you can see how patchy it is overall from Texas to the upper Midwest. There's been an increase also in the Northeast. The Midwest increase is primarily driven by seasonal variations, with changes mostly basically in this one are changes in the fall in the upper Midwest. And interestingly enough, the increase in precip in the Southeast basically is actually ultimately on the annual scale is actually ultimately a decrease in the mean annual precipitation, because despite the fall, ultimately there are seasons, winter, summer, and spring, where the precipitation is decreased in the Southeast U.S. So highly variable spatially and temporally, the changes in precip. Okay, so all right, Florida. So what does all this mean as we move on? Florida. All right, so before I talk a little bit about Florida here and wrap things up, I want to talk about return periods, just a little bit of the lingo. And so what is a return period? It's basically how long it takes between, how long it will be between rainfall events of a given magnitude and duration. So if the return period for a 3-hour rainfall total is 6 inches, it's say in Melbourne, Florida, is 25 years. That means on average, a 6-inch rainfall over 3 hours occurs here once every 25 years. Keep in mind, this is just based on observations or statistics, and there's no guarantee that once you've had this much rain, it won't happen again for another 25 years. It just says that if you had 100 years of records, there would be 4 such rainfall events on average once every 25 years. Ultimately, these could be in consecutive years or even multiple events in a single year. So no guarantee that a nearby location will not experience such event or a series of events. So how do these work? Turns out that NOAA has this cool little data set based on observations In Florida, there's 242 stations here in Florida. And so they have something called depth, duration, frequency. These curves are available readily online. You can download the data and play with it. I was taking a look at it. And then some FIU researchers basically last year came in and made some adjustments to bring these sort of curves into the future by using climate model simulation. But let me just show you how one works. So you can come into this figure. Let's take an hour duration event, which is that vertical line. And then let's draw horizontal lines across that intersect basically that solid black curve, which is basically indicates that a 1 hour event basically happens once every 2 years. So here's the 2-year threshold. You can draw a second line. It looks like that goes to, these are depth in inches on the left, on the y-axis. A 7-inch event basically is not a 1 and 2 year event, but 1 in 1,000 year event, right? In terms of these are again based on observations, not the future. Okay. And so that's how these things are interpreted. And again, FIU's gone in and made some changes of these to try to bring these information into the future. So if you're into planning for these things, that kind of information is pretty important. So this is kind of data is readily available and it's available to the public online. I've got some links at the end of my presentation. Here's what that data looks like if you wanted to download a spreadsheet. I did for Melbourne basically, and they have again for different durations. I showed you a 60-minute one, but they can go ultimately for longer periods, 24 hours, a week, etc. So these are kind of nice. And there's a link right there at the bottom. All right, parting shots and comments because I'm probably gone too long. So here's one paradox of a warmer world and wetter events is that they're also more extreme drought as well. Don't forget that warmer temperatures basically cause more evaporation. So that can take liquid water and evaporate it, basically, causing drought and increased drought frequency in some areas of the world, especially places that are prone to drought. Maybe are expected to become drier over the next centuries. So I didn't really say much about frequency versus intensity, but I'm going to skip that one as well because I want to take my shots here and wrap it up. And I think I think this is not intended to be cynical, but more pragmatic. I think that ultimately what's going to drive the sort of move to really to make changes is ultimately going to be economic. Unfortunately, at least to a certain extent, this is an article from the School of Law, Boston University, and I took the first paragraph, says Americans are moving to Florida in droves, according to Redfin. Home to the 5 of the top 10 U.S. metro areas, the highest rate of growth. Many of these new residents have flocked to sunny coastal cities like Miami and Fort Lauderdale, leading to skyrocketing real estate prices and demand for beachfront property, which outpaces supplies. And I italicize the influx of new homeowners is remarkable, given that Florida faces some of the greatest climate-related risks in the country, with the future of many of its popular destinations uncertain. So I talked about the role of increased precipitation, tropical cyclones, which certainly matters to us, but we also have clear weather, this nuisance flooding, which has nothing to do with precipitation whatsoever, and rising sea levels. So I think, unfortunately, Florida's climate-fueled insurance crisis, I don't know about you guys out there, but my homeowner's insurance doubled this year in response to 2 events, Nicole and Ian of last fall, and I don't see any end in sight for that process. Eventually, people are going to stop coming here because it's going to become prohibitively expensive and people are going to start leaving. And so basically, these are my references and I will leave it there because I don't want to take any more of the time and stop my share. And so we can move on to our next speaker. Thank you very much, Phil.
Thank you, Dr. Lazarus. Thank you very much. I know that many people are going to have questions, and I know that and I hope that you'll be able to stay to the end of the program to answer those questions. It seems very technical, but the whole point here is that there is a basis for people's concern. People are watching this as we already discussed tonight. You don't have to be a scientist to know that it's getting hotter. You don't have to be a scientist, but I'll tell you what, being a scientist quantifies it. If you want proof, there is proof, and there is good science behind our understanding of climate change. And so, Dr. Lazarus, we are very, very glad that you were able to come back to us and able to answer our questions. So thank you, and thank you again. You know you're very popular. Our crowd is happy to have you here, my friend. Let's move on to our next speaker, Dr. Robert Scheller. Again, he's from the North Carolina State University he's an associate dean from the College of Natural Resources. And Dr. Scheller, we've talked about the big picture. We've talked about the oceans. We've talked about the impact on younger people. We would love to hear what your perspective is on the biosystems of our planet and how they are being impacted by climate change. You have the floor.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Phil. Thanks, Bonnie. Appreciate the opportunity. Let's start sharing the old PowerPoint. This talk is really going to be more about solutions than consequences, but we do have to start with some consequences. And there it goes. And we'd start with some really basic biology first, which I think is fascinating. Do forests respond to climate change? Is a good question. And so you think about it, here's a maple tree growing in northern Wisconsin. You can see, let's see, spring, summer, it kind of jumps around, fall, winter, right? You think about this maple tree, it's experiencing about 130-degree range Fahrenheit, range in temperatures on it over an entire year, 130 degrees. In a single day in northern Wisconsin, where the temperatures can fluctuate quickly, might experience 50 degrees Fahrenheit change in temperatures. And so why do we even think that 2 or 3 degrees temperature would actually affect forests? Good thing people have been studying this for a while, and we just look at the continental distribution of tree species, and here's sugar maple again, we can always see it's pretty closely correlated to temperature and precipitation. So every species has its unique climatic niche for which it's really carefully adapted. And we can also see this looking back at the paleo record. So looking at cores from the bottom of lakes, we can look at the pollen going back 18,000 years, and we can track how tree species ranges have changed following the peak of glaciation in North America 18,000 years ago. So if we look at the top, hopefully everybody can see my cursor here. This is the distribution of spruce 18,000 years ago. And we can see it's shifting north as we get closer and closer to current day. This is 500 years ago. So spruce is headed north, actually starts, spruce is quite common across North America. And so here we can see the same with oaks. Were very isolated, Florida, Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, and now they've spread across all of Eastern North America. Similar story with pine, is now distributed across the boreal forest. So we've seen in the past, trees have also adapted to climate change, in this case, due to glaciation. But the world has changed, and it's changed a lot since this data was collected. So just repeating, all species have unique climatic niche that determines where it will grow and reproduce best. Okay, what else is climate sensitive? And I know everybody's been hoping I would talk a lot about wildfire. In fact, this is my only wildfire slide. But wildfire certainly makes the news. It's just the most photogenic disaster, really. But the data are really clear if you look at temperature, the black line here, and then wildfire frequency, the red lines, just so carefully correlated, highly correlated. It's amazing. And, in Canada, just record climate fire season this past summer in Canada. And it was because the temperatures were off the charts. Unbelievable. Delaney showed this, just how, I didn't know this about Florida, how off the charts the temperatures were in Florida this last summer, equally so for Canada. Just the step change was such that no one had any anticipation that it could get so dry and hot in Canada. But wildfire, like I say, gets all the press. Well, it's the insects that are causing all the mortality, really. Insects cause far more tree mortality than wildfire. They're just not very photogenic. So how this happens, so here's a mountain pine beetle. higher temperatures cause faster population growth, and they can have many generations in a summer. So rather than 2 generations, they might have 3 or 4 generations of mountain pine beetles. And then they can overwinter better if the winter is warmer. So you get these explosive insect outbreaks, which have really devastated Western North America. Hot droughts is a new topic in forestry. And this is the idea Steve talked about, the droughts are becoming more common. It's really this combination of high temperatures and low precipitation. It turns out that this is incredibly deadly for trees. And this is becoming increasingly common across the world. So the last big one in our neighborhood was in 2012 in Texas. Hundreds of millions of trees died in Texas in 2012. And it was a hot drought that only lasted a few months. What else is climate sensitive? Well, humans are in fact highly climate sensitive. So humans, for the most part, have the single largest effect on forest structure and diversity. More trees die by the chainsaw than any other cause. And, humans are doing a lot of things in our forests. Traditional logging, we think of people might be doing more proactive management, like thinning fuels. So here we see a nicely cleaned up ponderosa pine forest from the western United States, trying to prevent wildfires. People also develop out into areas, fragmenting forest. And humans are also going to respond to climate change. How we use our forests is going to change as the climate is changing. We are not going to be passive recipients of climate change. It is going to alter our behavior as well. Okay, and so the net consequences, and I'm sure everybody's aware of this, we can see altered species distribution, not just the trees, but any animals and other plants that are associated with the trees. Now the challenge is, as I showed before, trees migrated, and Phil referenced this briefly, trees migrated naturally following glaciation previously, but our landscape is far too fragmented now. And so now we have the challenge of altered species distributions, and yet species aren't able to quickly or easily migrate. There's going to be a lot of habitat loss. There's going to be lower diversity in many places. We're particularly worried about reduced carbon storage with forests. Everybody's thought of, well, forests are going to save our bacon. We'll just grow a lot of forests and that'll absorb all the carbon. Unfortunately, now, due to all these different disturbances, the forests are also emitting carbon today. We can see loss of clean water, clean air, and it's really going to harm human activities. Recreation might seem like a minor thing, although many states are dependent on tourism. But it's going to be, the whole host of activities that humans use forests for will be impacted. And so what should we do about it? And this is going to be most of my talk. I think my talk might be relatively brief. And there's a big underlying philosophical question here is, should we do anything about it? Or should we allow nature to do its thing? A lot of people think, managed least is managed best. And this really goes back to Henry David Thoreau and John Muir and Teddy Roosevelt and the idea of wilderness and the sanctity of nature. That wilderness was this resilient, transcendent concept that existed outside of humans and could exist in perpetuity without human intervention. And that sounds great. And it's a very attractive concept, as it has been for a couple hundred years now. Alternatively, we also recognize wilderness is really a white colonial invention. There was no wilderness until most of the Native Americans were extirpated. So most of North America was very actively managed by the indigenous people before European settlement. And their primary tool for landscape management was using fire. So they weren't using drip torches as we see here, but they had their own tools and cultural practices, and they burned extensively across North America. And so wilderness was only born after Native Americans were removed creating the perception of untrammeled wilderness, nature resilient on its own. So the more practical questions that I've studied are, what can we do about it? And there's a whole variety of forest management actions that can be taken to counter the effects of climate change. And I don't have the time during this talk to get into all the details, but there's a whole huge variety of things we can do. There's facilitated migration, helping species migrate because the landscape is fragmented and climate change is happening incredibly quickly. We can do facilitated biodiversity, adding species. We can do facilitated evolution, helping species genetically adapt to climate change in anticipation of it. We can do more prescribed fire, more thinning, returning Native American practices across North America. There's a whole host of actions I'd love to talk about, but I cannot. Next big question is, where will management be effective? So, there's a time and place for everything, and not all management actions are appropriate for all places. We have to think about, how much will it cost? There's very limited resources available right now for natural resource management. So we have to be really careful about how we spend those scarce resource dollars. Where do we want to really put our money as far as creating climate adaptive forests? And the last big question we need to consider is, how do we convince people that we should be doing this on their landscape? So our landscapes aren't empty. They're occupied by the people who have their livelihoods there. They might have a cultural identity there. For Native Americans, this is part of their, their whole world concept of them being part of the land, not separate from the land, that their people and the land were indistinguishable. And so we have to think about, how do the people who occupy our landscapes, what do they want to see? What sort of changes will they accept? And these are all the kind of things that I've worked on. And one of the big tools we use is forest landscape simulation models. I'm not going to do this justice, but we start with what we call digital twin. It's kind of all the buzzword these days of trying to capture all the data imaginable about a place. And so this is, Blob is a landscape in central Minnesota, close to where I grew up. And in that blob, we use all the remote sensing data and all the inventory data, all the different data we can gather together about that landscape to create as perfect of a digital twin as we can for that landscape. And we pair that with management scenarios. So management scenarios let us ask these if-then questions. If we do this kind of management, what will happen? If we do this other kind of management, what will happen? And using these scenarios, we can mix and match different management philosophies to see what comes out in the long run. So we take our digital twin and our management scenarios, we feed it into this big fancy simulation model. Just imagine SimCity on steroids, lots of moving pieces, simulating wildfires and logging and insects and all this cool stuff happening within our model. Of course, we're adding climate change. And then we're projecting out into the future, try to estimate what is our best path forward. What are the opportunities? What are the costs? What are the considerations if we're going to do adaptive management for climate change? And so normally this part of the talk, I'd show some amazing science and lots of graphs and stuff. But I'm just, been doing this for 30 years, looking at how climate will alter natural resources. And I've worked with just hundreds of amazing people from across the globe. Skip all those details and just jump right to the conclusions. What have we learned? Or, what have I learned over the last 30 years? And 30 years is really accurate. Celebrate 30 years since my first paper was published will be next year, which is amazing and humbling. Okay, these are my big conclusions after a lot of work. Conclusion number one is, we must manage our landscapes. The best practices are going to vary really widely, and there's no single recipe. Every landscape is unique and distinct. It has its own landscape history, has its own people, has its own ownership patterns and biophysical parameters. So there's just no cookie cutter. We should be doing this and not that. It really has to be tuned really carefully to the landscape you're considering. Regardless, we need to take an active role to maintain our natural resource heritage given climate change. More wilderness will not be sufficient. We cannot, put a fence around it and say, good luck. I know, you've done fine with climate change after the glaciers retreated 14,000 years ago. You'll be fine with that. That is not going to work this time. Things are changing too quickly, and we occupy far too much of the landscape. The great news is, without a doubt, our evidence shows that we can help our systems adapt. It is possible to use the management solutions we have today, the technology we have today, to create a better future for natural resources. However, of course, there's always a however, it will need to be extensive and committed. It's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to take time. It's not going to be one and done. We're not going to rush in and do some management actions and then that's great, we're done. No, we're going to need to be committed for decades into the future. Continual management, much more along the lines of how Native Americans managed their landscapes in the past, which was every year they were doing something, managing their landscapes. There's going to be some very difficult choices, however, in our future. So in general, we can help our systems adapt. There's going to be some places where forests, for example, cannot remain forests. I'm thinking of particularly the southwestern United States. Much of those forests simply will not, much of that landscape simply will not support forests into the future because of these recurring hot droughts. Now you can go back in and keep replanting trees year after year. That will not be a good use of our resource dollars. We just have to accept some changes are going to happen. We also need to realize there's going to be some real trade-offs among our values. We're going to have to be in constant discussion about what do we value about these places so we can decide, shape our management appropriately to reflect those values and helping people understand what those trade-offs are among our values. So for example, in some systems, if we want to maintain biodiversity, we have to thin the forests. If we thin the forests, they're going to retain less carbon. So, and this is true in California. And so that's a real trade-off that we have to consider. Do we want biodiversity? Is that the value we have for this landscape, or is it carbon retention? And science can only help us understand these choices. Science will not make these choices. We really have to work with the people of these landscapes, the people who manage these landscapes. And so just repeating that, great science will not be enough. Our primary barriers are not scientific or technical. A lot of, incredibly smart people, tens of thousands of people have been plugging away at this. Again, at least the last 30 years. In science, we have brilliant models and a lot of data. That's not our biggest barriers. Not that we don't need more data and more models, otherwise we'll be out of a job. That's not our biggest challenge. Our biggest challenge is investing in people. We need people to be educated about the choices. We need people to participate in these discussions about what do we want out of our landscapes. And we need environmental justice so that everyone feels included in these decisions. We also need to invest in policy innovation at all scales. Policy right now in the United States is very frozen. And this gets to the politics Delaney was referencing, where, and I'm not going to cast aspersions, but we're a little bit dysfunctional right now. I'll just say that. We're a little bit dysfunctional, and that's preventing us from shifting our policies. So our reality, our climate and biophysical reality is changing so rapidly, it's just mind-boggling, but our policy is frozen, and we need to unfreeze our policy. And therefore, God bless you, Delaney. We need people who are good at politics, because that data, is a safer space for me, I think. My last point is we need to collaborate. Collaboration facilitates problem solving, facilitates rapid decision making, and collaboration and relationships that go along with that are going to be critical during crises. And right now, we're experiencing a climate crisis, and a crisis is not the time to figure out who your friends and enemies are. So we need to be collaborating all the time, all the way, through all situations. We have to collaborate with people we fundamentally disagree with. We might hate their politics. We still need to find a way to collaborate with them anyways, because this is going to take an all hands situation to get through this. This climate crisis is becoming a forest crisis. It's becoming a wetland crisis. It's becoming a prairie crisis. So we all absolutely just all have to work together to get through this. Okay, my last big question is, do we have the capacity to adapt? This sounds monumental, but if you look at what humans have accomplished, not always for the good, but we've accomplished amazing landscape transformations in the past. And it was because of policy, it was because of investment of money, because people committed to it, people collaborated, created fantastic changes. So yes, we can, we've done it before. And really the real question is, do we have the courage to act for this next phase? Okay, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. I really appreciate that. I actually was just out at Yosemite about a month ago, and we've been there numerous times over the years. The devastation of the landscape around the Yosemite Valley in California is shocking. I knew it was happening. We've all seen it on television, these incredible fires, these massive fires that spread rapidly and burn at rates that people have never seen before. But to go out there and see it with your own eyes, to see areas that were pristine for the past 40 years that are literally gone. Just a lot of carbon in the form of burnt trees, a lot of hillsides. The valley itself, the Yosemite Valley, is still saved, but to see that with your eyes. And we just literally drove through an area where there was massive flooding in Central California. It's an ancient lake bed that has not had water in it for many, many years, that was filled with water. Very strange things happening. And we all need to work together to figure out how we're going to manage this. So thank you so much for being here tonight. And I know people are going to have questions. Again, thank you very much for being here, Doc, because we're going to have some questions in just a few minutes. Those of you that are waiting for your chance to ask questions, we have one more speaker, and then we're going to open the floor for a Q&A for all of our panelists. And again, I'd like to remind all of you that no matter whether you're on a phone, a pad, a laptop, it all works the same. Zoom, somewhere on your screen, you're going to find a little reactions window, and in that you'll be able to raise your hand. So in about 20 minutes, we're going to open the floor. So looking for your interesting questions for our panelists. Our next speaker is Dr. Catherine Toms. She's a public health physician and a leader of Green Cars for Kids, an effort that I'm going to let her explain. And Dr. Toms, you have the floor.
Okay, great. Do I have my volume on, I think?
You sound good.
Good. First of all, thank you, Bonnie, for the warm invitation, and Phil for being an awesome host. To my other speakers, I learned a lot already. And Delaney, I've always wanted to meet you, so this is a great occasion. And most importantly, thanks to all the members of the Space Coast Progressive Alliance for being here on a Thursday night when you could just be a couch potato vegging out on something that really doesn't inform but is relaxing. So I was going to talk about how we are getting warmer, wetter weather, but I think that Steve and Delaney really covered that. And Robert's previous presentation really segues into what I want to talk about. So I like to use this heat wave mnemonic to kind of explain how climate change impacts our health. So climate change caused by fossil fuel pollution poses significant health risks to all of us. And these health impacts include extreme heat, which together with air pollution from wildfires, transportation, and energy generation cause or worsen pre-existing heart and lung diseases, including asthma and COPD. So warmer average temperatures lead to longer pollen seasons and more allergies. And we can be injured during tornadoes, hurricanes, or floods, which will be more powerful and more frequent as we see more global warming. Water and foodborne illnesses will thrive in warmer environments that will be seen in the coming decades, as will mosquitoes and ticks. We're already seeing that they have larger habitats coming up, but especially mosquitoes coming up from South and Central America. And Florida had 4 cases of malaria that wasn't due to someone traveling to another country. So they were cases that started in Florida. That means we have malaria carrying mosquitoes in Florida. So climate anxiety and PTSD are real. And the PTSD from extreme weather events like hurricanes and tornadoes, we've all seen it on television after those hurricanes. And that's what invokes a lot of empathy for the people that have to go through that. So because widespread drought, especially in the global south, and because of it in the global south, we're already seeing food and potable water insecurity, which leads to famine and internal but cross-border conflict and displacement of large populations. And unfortunately, that really impacts children and women. So some of our neighbors and family members are more vulnerable to these impacts than others. A lot of elderly people, people with pre-existing conditions. And I want to, in particular, speak about children and a little bit about pregnant people, but also outdoor workers who can't get away from extreme heat, are exposed, and other groups too. So I'm going to focus on children. And so what makes kids especially at risk for the health impacts of climate change and the associated air pollution that goes along with it? Well, it's basically because they're growing physically and cognitively and emotionally. They are going through growth spurts, which are make them especially vulnerable to environmental pollutants and extreme heat. So just think of before children are born. In the womb, they're exposed to these pollutants, and the first 5 years of their lives, they're especially at risk. And in adolescence, children have fast growth spurts. So lungs are growing, learning is at an accelerated pace, and this sets the stage for physical and economic health impacts as adults. So kids aren't just little adults. Their physiology is different. Their metabolism, first of all, is much faster. They need to eat and drink more water for their bodies, for their body weight than we do as adults. They have higher respiratory and heart rates than adults. So air pollutants have a greater impact on them. They have smaller body mass to surface area ratios and underdeveloped hormone regulation, and that makes them less able to compensate, more likely to become dehydrated and develop heat exhaustion or heat stroke during high heat days, like we saw this summer. Their behavior is also different than adults, and that makes them more vulnerable. So children are more active and spend more time outdoors, and that increases their exposure time to outdoor pollutants, pollen, and extreme temperatures, making them more vulnerable. Teens who play sports often wear protective equipment. Think about football players in the summer practicing, and that makes them less able to cope with high temperatures. And finally, kids just rely on others. They rely on us, adults, for their care. And their dependency spans us remembering to remove them from car seats when we leave the car, keeping them hydrated on hot days, and like Robert mentioned, advocating for policies that ensure they have a healthy future. Children are also at risk when they're exposed in utero, as I mentioned, to climate stressors. So there was a landmark study in 2020 of over 32 million US births, and the study found that women exposed to high temperatures or air pollution during pregnancy are more likely to have premature, underweight, or stillborn babies. The results also showed that not all women are impacted equally. Black women and women with asthma are even more affected. Another study found that increased heat was linked to premature birth, increased hospital admissions for young children, and fast weight gain for babies, which increases their risk of obesity. And studies found air pollution caused by fossil fuel combustion was linked to reduced fertility. And finally, fetal exposure to wildfire smoke doubled the risk of severe birth defects. So, just a second. These impacts, I don't know if you all are familiar with the lifespan. So that's basically from the womb to the time that humans reproduce again and beyond. And it can have far-reaching impacts into the next generation. So climate change and pollution exposure in utero, in childhood and adulthood have been proven to impact our health and well-being throughout this lifespan and across generations. Individuals will be born disadvantaged because of in utero climate-related insults, are burdened with predispositions to disease, like I mentioned, obesity and metabolic disorders like diabetes. Congenital defects, heart disease has been linked to extreme heat pollution, extreme heat in utero, allergies, neurodevelopmental diseases, and psychological impairments. Let's see, increased heat was linked to premature birth, increased hospital admissions for young children, and fast weight gains. Oh, I mentioned that. Okay. So let's move on to the next slide. So this is a topic that I came across, hang on a second. This is a topic that I came across personally because I had a gas leak from our gas stove in the house. And then the more I researched it, the more I realized the impacts of gas stoves. So if you look at the QR code in the top corner, it'll link you to the policy statement that I helped write for the American Public Health Association and a really wonderful team at RMI. And if you haven't had a chance to check out RMI's website, I highly recommend that. They have a lot of really good tools and information. So there are a lot of things we can do to reduce our family's exposure to environmental harms and harms to society. And I want to, of course, give you some takeaway tools from tonight's session. So let's learn about 2 exposures, because there are a lot of things we can talk about, but let's focus on just those. One is methane or gas stove exposure, and the other one is fossil fuel powered transportation. So first, let's talk about natural gas. natural is a way that the gas and fossil fuel industry make it sound less harmful than what it is. It's basically methane, and that we pump into our house to cook our food, and we use to heat our homes and our water. So it's a potent greenhouse gas, and according to the Environmental Defense Fund, methane has more than 80 times the warming power of carbon dioxide over the first 20 years that it's in our atmosphere. So even though CO2 lasts longer, about 100 years, methane sets the pace of warming in the near term. And so addressing methane emissions can really reduce the rapid pace of global warming right now in the next 20 years. So at least 25% of today's global warming is driven by methane emissions. And let's see, when we use it to cook, it releases harmful toxins, namely nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter, carbon monoxide, formaldehyde, and of course, methane. And a third of Americans cook primarily with gas stoves. So we can make a big impact also health-wise if we share this information, but also in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Households with gas stoves are used for cooking, have between 50 and 400% higher levels of nitrogen dioxide than those with electric stoves, and higher concentration of nitrogen dioxide from gas stoves are associated with longer cook times and lack of ventilation. So low-income communities and communities of color are at much greater risk of harm for indoor pollution caused by gas stoves for many reasons, like higher prevalence of pre-existing conditions like asthma and heart disease, substandard housing with lack of adequate ventilation, and smaller living spaces. So I mentioned nitrogen oxides, that's nitrogen dioxide and nitrogen oxide. They're secondary pollutants that also form ground level ozone and particulate matter. So when the WHO's ozone limit is exceeded, we see substantial increases in hospital admissions for heart attacks, heart failure, stroke, and this is especially for older adults. And nitrogen oxides are harmful for children as well. So kids residing in homes with gas stoves that emit nitrogen oxides have a 42% higher risk of developing asthma and a 24% higher lifetime risk of asthma than children living in homes with electric stoves. And that's comparable to a child living with a smoker in the home. So I'll get back to what you can do to reduce your exposure to gas stoves if you have a gas stove, or what you can do later. But I just want to go on and talk about transportation systems. So according to the Congressional Budget Office, transportation accounts for the largest portion of CO2 emissions in the US, almost 2/3 of which are from personal vehicles. And the latest data from the US Energy and Information Agency tells us that 50% of Florida's total greenhouse gas emissions come from transportation. So if we can transition to clean electric vehicles and fuel them with 21st century clean electricity generated by the sun and other renewables, we can really reduce our carbon pollution. So what's the best way to speed up this transition? Well, I want to hone in on school buses because there's some federal funding available right now, and it's open until January 31st that you can advocate with your school district to apply for this funding to transition from diesel-driven school buses to electric school buses. So just quick facts. So the US school bus fleet is enormous. It's in fact 2.5 times the size of US mass transit systems. And more than 20 million children ride a school bus, and 60% of low-income children ride a school bus. 95% of our school buses are powered now by diesel. So air pollution inside diesel buses is up to 12 times higher than outdoor levels of pollution. And exhaust from internal combustion engines, the ones we primarily drive, harm the planet and our health. I mentioned PM 2.5, ozone, and nitrous oxide, and explained those. But I didn't mention that they're identified by the EPA as likely carcinogens. So the benefits of switching to electric school buses is it will eliminate a lot of health problems, especially reduce our risk and our incidence of asthma, especially among children. It'll reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and it is cheaper, has a lower total cost of ownership over time. It's cheaper to maintain both cars and buses. I have an electric car, and I haven't had to have any maintenance done in 3 years. And fuel costs are a lot cheaper. So then there's also the ability to have vehicle to grid connections that can provide power to the grid during hurricanes and things like that. So these are just some of the benefits from the American Lung Association for transportation electrification. So fewer premature deaths, saving almost $1 trillion in public health benefits, and a reduction in asthma rates. I love this graph because it really shows that transportation is the key in America to greenhouse gas reductions. Because if you see that blue line, the cost of renewable energy just a few years ago, about 5 years ago, dropped. So there's already an economic incentive for power companies to switch to renewables. It's no longer cost effective to use fossil fuels. This is just an example of what's called TOD, transportation-oriented design, that a lot of cities are using. Oh, sorry, I'm going over a little bit. Is that okay? I'll try and wrap it up.
You bet. You're on a roll.
Okay. This is just really having people-centered cities where you live close to public transportation. You have a lot of great bike lanes and walking paths, a lot more urban forests, to Robert's point, and just smarter and easier lifestyle. So check that out. It's abbreviated TOD. Michael Reagan sums it up best, the EPA administrator, that transitioning to clean transportation means cleaner air and less pollution. It also means healthier kids and a greater focus on productivity. So this is Green Cars for Kids. I'm just going to quickly tell you about it, and then we'll wind up. I have some calls to action that I can share with you all, but I'll save that for afterwards. Let's see. So Phil, you mentioned the new nonprofit that I started, and our purpose is simple. We can coordinate free transportation for low-income expectant moms and kids to healthcare visits that they would otherwise miss. But the catch is we use electric vehicles. So it's based on a successful program that's operated for 26 years in Birmingham, Alabama. And the only difference is we use electric cars. And in the first 2 months, we started the end of May. In the first 2 months of our program in Broward County, we've already driven 352 patients to healthcare visits that they otherwise would have missed. So there's some contact information, and I'll share the rest of my slides for a call to action. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Dr. Toms. This is absolutely fascinating. I'm big into electric vehicles myself. Everybody at our organization will tell you that. A longtime EV driver and solar advocate, sustainability fan. But I'll tell you what, being able to use your EV to help people, not only to make the world healthier, but to actually directly help people get to their appointments to get to healthcare, I think is a magnificent concept. And that Model X looked really cool there with the super graphics on it. But I'll tell you what, we now will be opening the floor so that our participants here on Zoom can raise their hands. And again, I've mentioned it earlier, but I'll do it again. If you're on Zoom, whether you're on a phone, whether you're on a pad or a laptop, look for the little reactions button, click on that, and it should allow you to raise your hand. And once we see your hands raised, we'll encourage you to ask a question. We ask you to make sure that it is a question rather than just a statement. And we'll try to give everybody a chance to ask their questions. We'd like to keep our questions to around 3 minutes or so that we can get several people in before the end of our program tonight. We have 3 fantastic speakers plus our youth speaker. Each of them can answer your questions. By the way, for our panelists, if you have questions of each other, or if you've got a comment that you'd like to add, this is a great opportunity to mix it up a little bit and ask or fill in the blanks if you saw somebody that might have left an open topic that you'd like to cover. This is your chance right now. So if anybody like to pick that up, this is your chance. I'm going to take the point of privilege, since I haven't seen a hand go up, to ask any of you, how is it that you are living your personal life in a way that increases your sustainability? How is it that you would recommend that other people, what can we do to really make a difference with regard to addressing climate change in our own world, and maybe in a bigger way, how do we influence our government more to do the right thing? Any of you in order, who would like to take that one?
I'll start. I mean, so it's always nice to be able to do things, not wait for your fearless leaders to take you into the future. So, I mean, vegetarian lifestyle, shrinking your carbon footprint, less meat. So that's something you can do personally. I'm not saying no meat, but less meat's a good thing. And in addition to that, what else am I doing? We have a native landscape in the yard, basically fully no fertilizers. We don't water. So these things are things you can do personally to make things basically, Oh, and the other thing, of course, other diet is that, watch your snack food, because a lot of it has palm oil. And those palm oil plantations are in the Indonesian region, and they're cutting down a lot of forests. And so almost all snack foods basically are loaded with that kind of stuff. So best I can ask folks to do is be intelligent consumers. That kind of runs along the thread of Delaney's comments earlier tonight. So watch what you put in your mouth.
An excellent point. And it is always right at the top of the list of how to reduce your carbon footprint is watch what you eat. It's very well put. Thanks. Of our panelists, who else would like to? Doc, you got it. It is
or Dr. Toms. Sorry.
Dr. Scheller.
Slightly different tact. I'd say, find your wellspring of hope. We can all do things, and I'm sure everyone here is trying to do something to improve their reduce their personal carbon footprint. But I really worry about people getting burned out and losing hope and disengaging, particularly young people. Like, like Delaney, we need you to keep at this for the next 40 years until you retire. And so, try to find some, whether, you can volunteer for a local land conservation organization to cull invasive species, or, our church, we just did a stream cleanup where we had all kinds of families go out there and just cleaning up litter, just anything that, keeps the hope burning as much as the despair, right? Because it's going to be a long fight ahead of us, and we can't just think about the consequences and all the bad things. We also need to think about solutions and hope. So we need to foster all of those things.
And boy, I tell you what, that is absolutely true. I've seen so many of my friends, and I feel it myself, this sense of burnout or possible hopelessness. And it's like, maybe it's too late. Maybe there's nothing we can do. But I don't think that that's a good choice for the young people and for our future. And Dr. Toms, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I wanted to share my screen. Hang on, I shared the wrong one, and you guys don't want to see that. Hang on a second. Let's see, because to Steve's comment, he really jogged my memory. And I used to do a presentation. I think you can see it now. You're so on the money. That is the number one thing. And everybody says, well, that's so easy. And it is. So I call these trifecta solutions, and they're good for your wallet. They're good for the environment, and they're good for you. So really reducing your meat consumption is one. Start, if you just love meat, well, start with Meatless Mondays and choose the meal you love that doesn't have meat in it. That is the easiest way to coax yourself. And you can really become a vegetarian if you do it slowly, and it's really good. I pretty much don't eat meat now, and I eat better than I ever did when I had meat before. And let me show you this one too. Oh, shoot. Okay. If I used to have a QR code, I don't know what happened to it, but if you Google Knorr Future 50 foods, that will take you to a plethora of great grains, like really native grains and beans that you can eat, and some good recipes. And start a vegetable garden. If you have room in your backyard, you can pot tomatoes. I took a rotten tomato and just put it in some of the compost from that we have for our garden, and out popped tomato plants, a few days later. So it's fun and it's easy, and there are a lot of really good protein rich alternatives. So I'm going to move that one. And then here was my call to action. And it's just, this is another, I have two trifecta solutions. Steve, you hit the one on less meat. I had a graph there too that really showed that, and I can pull it up again, that there are certain meats that really hit it. Strangely, lamb has a huge greenhouse gas impact, and also cows, of course, because they produce methane, and then transportation, everything with generating meat causes greenhouse gas emissions. But to transportation, it's my other trifecta solution. So drive your car less. Use active transportation if you can. In other cities, like my husband's Norwegian, people walk and bike to work like crazy, and you can't use bad weather as an excuse, because they have bad weather 6 months of the year and dark. So advocate for safe streets, and really talk to your TPO, your transportation authority in your area about that. Tell them you want it. And you know what? Stop idling. That causes so much greenhouse gas emissions. And every time I walk by somebody just idling their car to stay cool when it's already getting cool in Florida. So if it's already cool enough here to roll down your windows, you don't need to idle. And when I would pick up my kids after school, it would drive me crazy to have, a whole line of big cars idling. So, and just do smart things that save you money too. Combine errands. Try not to just run out all the time for things you need. Make a list. And just keep a note. What's that last one? Oh, yes. Advocate for electric school buses. So here is, oops, sorry. I'm getting too excited. Ah, I messed it up. So here is a link. Just hold up your phone to that. That will take you to the EPA's information about the school bus rebates that are open now. Talk to your school board and talk to your state officials and tell them you want support for that. In fact, reach out to your state officials now, because there's a law that, or a new bill coming up in the next session in Florida to tax unfairly a high tax on electric vehicles. We'll need to transition to taxing electric vehicles because that's how we get the money to maintain our roads. We get that through gasoline tax now, but they're proposing $200 a year, and you don't spend that much in gasoline. I don't know. I think it's too high. So you can check that out. I won't talk anymore, and I'll stop sharing so somebody else can talk.
Thank you, Dr. Toms. Those are all excellent points. Many of the people that, like I said, that know me in this organization are going to be laughing because you just said everything that I typically tell people every day. I've actually had the chance to drive an electric school bus at an event, and it was a remarkably, it's a safer, cleaner, a more smooth and pleasant experience for the kids. Beyond the emissions, it is just a safer way to transport school children who theoretically we all value. Speaking of valuing young people, our last person to ask is Delaney. Delaney, what is it that you are recommending to people? What is it that you would like to see people doing to change the world in a better way?
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing that we have to do is cut back our fossil fuel emissions. So everything that's been said so far, 100% agree. I'm really fortunate that I can bike to and from school and to the grocery store and to CVS and all this kind of stuff. So I, in the last year, haven't been driving a lot, and it's actually been really nice. I just carry a raincoat. It's not that bad. But so other than cutting back fossil fuels, I would say get involved with politics, which is easy for you all. You're already doing that. And kind of push them, let them know that you are interested in climate change solutions. Because right now in the state of Florida, a lot of the solutions come from the grassroots local level, because at the state level, we have deniers. So that's where a lot of the change gets made. So, write them, call them, however you do, reach out to them and talk to them about what they're doing, what they're not doing, maybe what they should be doing and why. Come up with ideas, share them. Just by talking to political leaders here in South Florida, I've gotten involved with writing laws, creating funding. I've worked with city commissioners and mayors and you name it, as a kid. So they're willing to listen. They're willing to make changes, especially if you can see the impacts. And then besides that, again, I'm just going to harp on the fact, support youth. If they're, looking to get involved in politics or just looking to get involved in climate change in general, feel free to give them resources, share a little bit about what you learned tonight. Hopefully you can kind of carry our messages through. But yeah, that's what I would say.
Thank you very much, Delaney. I'll tell you what, again, you are a real inspiration for us. And I know we now have several people with their hands up, so maybe we're going to have some more questions for you. First question is from Marty. Great to see you, Marty. I'm so glad that you are here. It is wonderful to see you. What kind of questions do you have for our panelists?
I've two quickies. One, what they were just talking about with increasing tax on electrical vehicle owners to fund the road maintenance. I think if we can write our congressman and say electrical vehicle owners are using more electricity than they would if they didn't have electric cars, and that the taxes on electricity are about equal to those on gasoline, So if they could take electrical vehicle owners' electric bills and take some of that tax money that's being given, collected for that and put it toward the roads, that should be enough to do that, I would think. I don't know if anybody ever would do a study on it, but I just did check the percentage of tax and it was similar to the gas tax. So my second question, I don't know if this is allowable to ask, but talking about the not eating meat, I was wondering if we could have an informal poll, a little show of hands, like how many people are say close to vegan, if not vegan, but pretty close to that right now. Is that okay to ask, Phil? Is that
sure? It'd be actually very interesting just to take a quick poll. Looking at our group, I know we got quite a few. So just go ahead, everybody. Just raise your hands. I'm going to take a quick scan around and look and see if you think you're reducing your meat or are working toward being a vegan. Raise your hand. I'm just going to take a quick look and see what I can find. Give me just a moment to look at this. I see 1, 2, 3. For people that are still have their screens up, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I see a dog with its paw up. No, actually, it's just a dog. It looks to me like actually almost half of our group. Which doesn't surprise me at all. And I'm certainly, working on and I have been for many years, reducing, increasing meatless Mondays, that kind of thing. And it's really interesting. I think for people that, and by the way, my sister Marty has been a wonderful guide for me to show, hey, you know what, you really can reduce the amount of meat, and frankly, it does improve. I probably think it does improve the quality of your life. Dr. Toms was probably correct there. All of the evidence that we've seen over the past couple of decades is that the less our diets are dependent on meat, the healthier, get a lot of health benefits from it. It's also a more compassionate lifestyle. Frankly, you feel better about your life. And your impact on your carbon footprint on the planet really does make a difference. So thank you, Marty. That's a very good point. And it was very interesting to do a live. I always like to do that when I'm having live events. Everybody raise your hand. How many people believe in this or that? You do a little spot poll. Kind of interesting indeed. And by the way, thanks for that thought about, electric vehicle owners and the amount of money that we pay for the electricity we buy. And of course, many of us that have electric vehicles have solar panels on our roof. We're contributing to our community by generating the power, much of it we use ourselves. But hey, give us some credit for that. Most people in advanced societies are rewarding people for driving electric vehicles, providing an incentive for people to do the right thing rather than punishing them. Sooner or later, we have to raise money to pave our roads. We've all got that. But charging people that are trying to do the right thing an additional fee doesn't seem to be much of an incentive, and it will certainly turn some people away from doing the right thing. I know we had several other hands raised here, and let me get back to it. Bonnie, you have your hand up. Bonnie, you got the next question.
Few little questions, but also I thank Marty for her suggestion, because one was this: anything that disincentivizes getting an electric vehicle sounds so awful. So to tell them they have to pay this sum, right, Catherine, for an electric vehicle, that shouldn't be. So Marty has a solution, and I wonder if there are other ways to get around. So, okay, should we be helping paying for roads? Actually, we're helping in many ways. We're helping the air. We're helping a lot. I drive a Prius, so I'm not all electric, but I know my sister in Indiana has to pay extra for driving a Prius.
Dr. Toms, can you take that?
Yeah, I have a statistic. Oh, I wish I had it. Let me think. Okay, there was a new study that came out. I'm just taking this from memory, so I have to look for the actual study. But there was a study that came out in the spring that showed that you get health benefits in a local community when only 20 out of 20 cars in a population of 1,000 people are substituted, electric cars substitute ICE engines, so internal combustion engines. So if 20 people decide they're going to drive electric in a population of 1,000, you will see health benefits mainly with cleaner air, in lung disease and heart disease right away. And so they're real immediate health benefits from reducing our fossil fuel emissions. Everybody likes to say, well, their climate deniers say there is no global warming, or it's not anthropogenic, but it doesn't matter, because we end up having a better world if we do that. And I really want to share this with you, because sometimes you can, I forgot who was talking about burnout, but sometimes you can feel alone when you're doing this, and you're always sort of talking to a lot of different people, and then all of a sudden you get a climate denier. I love this little cartoon because, I love that he says, what if we're just doing this and we create a better world for nothing? So that's my reply to people that are climate deniers, because it's just going to make a better world. And then another thing I wanted to share is Drawdown. I just really like this website. Do you all like it? Do you know it? It has a lot of really concrete steps that we can take, a lot of policy action and everything. That's sort of what I like to use. And for you all, I just want to say, I don't want to shame anyone. I have lived in houses. I even lived in a house that had an electric stove and put in a gas line. So I was guilty. It wasn't until I found out how bad gas stoves are, I did the research, that I converted. So here are things that you guys can do to reduce your exposure. If you have a gas stove, or if you really like it, I'm telling you, an induction cook stove is the way to go. It is so fast and it's really good. I burned my dinners for the first month because it's so fast. I had to get used to it. So use your exhaust fan all the time. I didn't, because it was noisy. And make sure it vents to the outside. Open a window if it doesn't. Cook on the back burners. That will lower it. If you can afford a HEPA filter, get a HEPA filter. And my daughter lives in a little apartment in New York with a very old gas system and gas stove. And so for her birthday, I got her an induction cook plate. You can get them between $50 and $100. And I haven't linked to Amazon on there. There's another link there too. Oh no, I guess not. I like links because that empowers you guys. So I'm going to quit sharing.
You know what's interesting, Delaney, while you were talking, Delaney put up a link to the study that you had referenced. It's in our chat. So anybody that's looking at the chat, you can look at that link. It's springer.com, article 10.1007. You know what I usually wind up doing is I sit here and I look at all the stuff that's happening on the chat, and I don't have time to write it all down. So I just pull out my phone and take a quick picture of the chat, and I've got all these links, because when the program's done, it's like, oh man, I wish I'd written that down. It's right here for us right now, guys.
Yeah, so Phil, I wanted to echo Catherine's comment.
Go ahead.
We went to an induction stove. I love it, absolutely love it. Not that expensive, really, when you compare it to other stoves, and it cooks fast and it's wonderful. It doesn't get very hot, cools down rapidly. It's just great, absolutely great.
And you can talk about the importance of convection in a global climate system as we look at the hydrologic cycle as well. Hey, you know what, Larry?
Not so much.
I see Larry Abdullah's got his hand up, and I know Larry would love to ask you a question. Larry, you've got the floor.
Well, I appreciate all the talk about floods and forests, because it adds not only to our arguments with climate deniers, but our preparedness for how we adapt to what's coming. But I was wondering, when I look at the graph, about half of the greenhouse gases are coming from either industry or electric power generation. And, as a country, we had Obama's clean power program, which crashed, and the same question I asked last, the Inflation Reduction, the Act, did not get a chance to address power or industry. Now there are a couple things, and I appreciate talking about natural gas in the home. I didn't even know that, but natural gas in general has been a false solution because it leaks in fracking and it creates more it's a major greenhouse gas. And so that's one issue that both parties, seem to embrace natural gas. And so have we given up political hope to try to reduce the burning of coal and false solutions like natural gas and clean power? But not only that, in industry, I have seen that there's a cleaner way to make cement, which could make a huge difference. Do you think that there's still will left to address that? It's a political issue, but
Larry is firing on all cylinders here, and he's a former employee of the Florida Solar Energy Center, by the way, which is a wonderful local resource for any of you that are watching this tonight, and you've got questions about solar power or sustainability. Go look up Florida Solar Energy Center. It's right here in Cocoa, one of our wonderful neighbors that you can use as a resource. But Larry's asking a question of our panel. Is it like too late to fight back, or do you? Who would like to answer Larry's question?
I mean, can we address?
I'd say it's never too late. So Michael Mann at Penn State says, well, if we miss the exit we wanted to get off on, then you just go for the next exit, right? Every 1/10 of a degree that we avoid is fabulous because the consequences increase exponentially over time. And so, I agree, maybe things aren't moving as fast as I would like, but things are still moving and, moving in the right direction. And definitely I wouldn't want people to lose hope. And there's a lot we can do. There's a lot we will do. Maybe not as quickly as we all would like, but still happening.
So I do want to comment on that because yes, that's true. But ultimately, when you look at what we have left to reach our goal or limiting warming, say to 2 degrees C, then we have real limits on what we can emit. And the longer we wait, the atmosphere doesn't care really basically where that carbon comes from. Ultimately, the longer we wait, basically, the steeper the decline, the more painful it's going to be, right? It's just an area under the curve argument in terms of the net emissions, right? In terms of carbon dioxide. So, we have about 500 gigatons left in the budget, I think, depending on which report you read, of carbon dioxide ultimately left to burn before we blow past our latest and greatest goal of 2 degrees C. I think we're pretty much already by the 1.5 degrees C. You start reading some of the more recent literature. And so basically, this unfortunately cannot wait, right? That's, and as Robert said earlier, this is the essence, at least in part, of the climate crisis that we're facing, right? The clock is ticking. And so some things can go, sometimes you can mitigate slowly. This is not one of them. And it's going to be painful, and it's becoming more painful if we continue to allow emissions to increase and CO2 concentrations. They're 420 right now, and they're still climbing with no abatement. No signs of abatement except maybe a little bit of a slowdown during COVID. So there's reality here to deal with, and and this is where people like Delaney, we need pressure on the fossil fuel industry, the politicians, the folks that are driving, the fossil fuel industry is just spectacular, right? They say one thing, but they're clearly doing something else.
And, we are actually running out of time tonight. I see we have one more question here, John, iPhone 13. John, if you can take yourself off mute and ask your question, please. Do we have you, John? I think we might have lost him. It is time for us to wind down. What I'm going to do is very quickly, if I might, take a quick look at our action items. If for our panel, we always have been asking what kind of action items, what kind of things can people do? Because if everybody here just goes home and says, "Hey, I watched a great show," and they don't tell their friends, or they don't spread the word, or they don't do something, we've just been wasting our time here. This is not just entertainment. This is to encourage you to do something. So one of the action items is food choices. Look at the food choices that we all make, because it is one of the most important things that an individual can have on reducing our global climate our carbon footprint. Also, landscape, how you deal with your yard and in your house, how you do simple choices at home that can be made. Staying focused on the long haul. One of the things that we've said and said again here is don't give up, don't lose hope. Find a way to work with other people who might not be immediate, or might be so quick to jump on board, and to say, we've got to collaborate. We're all in this together. We're all in the same boat. Boat's going in a certain direction, and we're all in it together. Meatless Mondays is, again, another interesting thought. The idea of future 50 foods, something to look at online. A suggestion that we should drive less, consider driving an electric vehicle, whether it is an electric bike, maybe, or an electric car. There are a lot of different choices, and to advocate for electric school buses, something that's near and dear to my heart. Safe Streets. It's a really interesting program. I know Bonnie Ida, one of our members, very, very strong advocate of creating environments in our cities where people feel comfortable walking outside. You can go outside and in a comfortable city that's well designed. It's easy to go to a store. It's easy and comfortable and safe to spend time outside if they have streets, if the city's been designed effectively. Supporting youth efforts. Delaney has shown us that young people know the way. She's not the only one. There are young people in every community that need our support. Go online, check out Drawdown. It's a great website. It's an interesting book. Lots and lots of ideas on how you can reduce your carbon footprint. The idea of having an induction stove. You know what? If you have gasoline appliance, or if you have natural gas powered appliances, you can get, just that little induction pad, to reduce you're poisoning yourself by burning natural gas, by burning methane in your own home. There are lots and lots of things. Have I gotten all the action items, or do any of our panelists have other action items that I missed? Anybody in our panel have another action item that I've missed? Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to just right now, I'm going to a couple quick things here, and then I'm going to ask everybody to open up their mics so we can give everybody a round of applause. I would like to say thanks, of course, to our members, or to our speakers tonight. All four of them are inspirational. All four of them have opened my eyes in one way or another, and I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. Everybody, all of our members, and everybody that watches this YouTube video will have learned something and maybe been inspired to do at least a little something. And the program must not end here. I mean, if it means going out to your car and looking at the tire pressure on your tires, little things like that add up to huge impacts. Just driving the speed limit, because most people don't. Most people drive too fast, and we waste a lot of energy. Just dial it down a little bit. You don't have to buy a fancy electric vehicle to make an impact. You could start small, work your way up. Our next First Thursday program will be our holiday party on Thursday, December 7th. We've already talked about that tonight. Go check out our website, www.scpaflorida.com, for all of those things. Now, everybody, please come off of mute and let's give them. I saw. Did somebody have a question? Bonnie Edie.
Everybody, share the YouTube link to this program, because there's so much valuable information. It's just overwhelming, and would be wonderful for more people to hear it.
We have packed a lot of information into a very short program, and gosh, I hope that people can do that. We have a whole channel full of YouTube links. These last couple of nights have been spectacular, with information about how people can make the world a better place. So yeah, share those YouTube links. Thank you, Bonnie, for your work with that. Thank you, Larry, as well. Please, everybody, come off of mute. Let's give our panel a round of applause. Guys, This is a standing ovation for you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for what you
Thank
do.
you.
You are all wonderful people. I've been saying, hey, Delaney's a hero. All four of you are inspirational. I want to say thank you, and thank you again. I look forward to seeing all of you, all of our members. And by the way, we mentioned something about that the next event is for members only. If you're watching this and you're not a member, but you'd like to be a member, please come join us at our holiday party get together, and you could become a member. That would be something. Everyone is welcome. We'd love to see all of you. Again,
and you will get a free t-shirt.
You get a free SCPA t-shirt to join. Thank you again. Delaney Reynolds, Dr. Steve Lazarus, Dr. Robert Scheller, Dr. Catherine Toms, heroes of our time, working to educate all of us, to inspire all of us, and to make our world a better place. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night, and we'll look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for
Everybody.
having me.
You were great, all of you.
Good night,
Bye,
everyone.
Bonnie.
What a wonderful night. Thank you.